Testing 1 2, test 1 2, test 1 2. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. This was said in 1924 by Edward Bernays of the United States of America. Thank you for being here, Aaron and Arthur and Fletch and Jeff and Tony. Good to see you all. I do believe that biology is the way out, ladies and gentlemen, and this is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. Let me just scoot over here and check really quick. We're going to lose that for just a second, just to make sure that we are also live on YouTube. It appears we are. Thank you very much again for being here. The voice that you're listening to is Jonathan Couey out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You can find me on PubMed, where you use my last name, Couey, my first two initials. You can see some of the mess that I got involved with. Some of the evidence is even available on PubMed there. For example, the should we discount the laboratory origin of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19? That's an article that I'm not especially proud of, but it definitely is part of my track record and should not be dismissed, but rather assessed as part of the whole picture that I try to present every day that I come on stream. I've tried to teach this basic biology to PANDA and to the NCI and to the Wellness Company and to Children's Health Defense. I even got my name in a book with the current Health and Human Services Secretary. I presented this at Red Pill last year, thanks to G. Edward Griffin. And I'm trying to put together a YouTube channel based on biology and basketball that will kind of teach the biological principles that edify a different kind of Biology 101. And so if any of these things interest you, you're in the right place. Thank you very much again for being here. The headquarters is at gigaohmbiological.com. You can get notified by adding yourself to that list there. That hasn't actually started yet, but it will soon. And we archive everything at stream.gigaohm.bio. If you want to watch the stream live there, you can also watch it there. At some point, we're going to do a weekly stream that is just on PeerTube, just to see what we can pull off over there all by our lonesome. Thank you very much for being here again, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't care how you get there. I don't care what you do to get there. The goal is to win.
What time is it? Game time! Boom!
A Monday warrior, mean strike. Today's Tom Sawyer, mean pride. Though his mind is not for him, don't put him down as arrogant. His reserve a quiet defense, writing out the day's events. The river. What you say about his company is what you say about society. Catch the mist, catch the myth, catch the mystery, catch the drift. The world is love and life are deep. Maybe as his skies are wide. Today's Tom Sawyer, he gets high on you, and the space he invades, he gets by on you.
I do think it could be different this time, ladies and gentlemen. I definitely think it could be different this time. Thank you very much for being there, everybody. Of course, Mark's got to get in the chat and brag about how many times he's seen Rush, because he was totally into Rush before I was. I mean, I didn't even know who they were when I went to college. I don't even know how to tell you how much music I discovered as a college freshman. It was really an eye-opening experience, being an outdoor snake wrangling, fishing, basketball playing, non-music listening to kid that really thought U2 was the best band in the world. It was a really eye-opening experience, the 4 years I spent with, I don't know, young adults my age trying to figure out what this world meant. College was still okay in 1990 and 1991 and 1992 and 93 and 94. Think about going to college in Lincoln Park of Chicago in 91, 92, 93, 94, 95. Some of the best years of my life. I can remember every single one of those finals, including the very first one. I actually can remember seeing a bus tipped over, or almost tipped over. It rocked so hard, I thought people were going to get crushed by it. There's no way for anybody to avoid Gigaohm Biological at this point, because whether they like it or not, the word is slowly spreading. And the point is that the word only goes one direction. Once you experience the truth, once you see that this illusion requires your active participation, the whole thing disappears. Intramuscular injection is just dumb. Transfection is obviously a crime in healthy people, and RNA could never have pandemic. This is a ridiculous statement that any newly minted PhD student, just having gone through their oral exams, should have already known better. But unfortunately, because of the illusion of consensus that is created on TV and in social media, these really cardinal truths are just absolutely hidden. And the most important one being that the U.S. vaccine schedule is a criminal enterprise. And it's very easy to see if you compare it to any other vaccine schedule in the world. That's the cool part about it. It is indeed March 18th, 2025's Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information stream brought to you by a biologist. It is a message of hope that is not for everyone, but it is for anyone. We are here seeking the truth together, because this is for all the marbles, this is for all the grandchildren of Earth. And we are faced with a lollapalooza of liars. It is a team of people that have been, limitedly read in. A lot of them don't know the whole story because they're simply not sophisticated enough to even understand it. But they are aware that they are part of a governing elite, a narrative of people that is going along to get along, and covering up the truth, which is actually still right here on the About page of the LearnTheRisk.org YouTube channel. The United States has more vaccines on the childhood schedule than in any other developed country, and yet we have one of the sickest populations. Despite spending more on healthcare than any other developed country, we are exposed to a chemical cocktail from polluted air and water, processed foods laced with toxins and pesticides, and then we add vaccines to the mix. That says that right there still on the YouTubeage. That actually, the plate is fantastic. I would love that very much. Thank you. The noise that you'll hear and not see is the sound of me eating eggs in between words. Don't worry about that. It has been a long, strange trip. I have met a lot of these people and come to the conclusion that somehow or another, they're all part of a theater that I'm not playing in. I'm not read in on. And that's the best way that I can describe their behavior over the last 5 years, especially with reference to their personal interactions with me. I consider these people part of a group of highly trained acolytes that are put in place to manipulate our habits and opinions by controlling the questions we asked and the answers we arrived at, and they can trick us into believing anything. And I think in this context, you really have to start to suck it up and realize that if you look at the graph and you see that bright red is pneumonia deaths, And for a very brief period of time, we seem to have just not given a shit. And then we put everything back to normal again. And we have been tricked into believing that that was something other than what it was. It was murder and lies, and we have been tricked into believing that it was a novel virus, and it was the poor response to a novel virus. And in fact, it was not. It is really not even close to that. It is an elaborate national security theater that has been set up and put in place and running for quite some time. And it's just the latest act in this theater that we've experienced as the pandemic. But this act has had many other acts before it, and one of the best ones that nobody is aware of anymore, but if you paid any attention to our shows, you'd be aware of the fact that Sasha Latipova's daughter was playing within a network of the same kind of social media military control mechanisms that we are victims of now. Maybe even she was a prototype. And that career culminated in 2019 with her being on Alex Jones like 3 times. And so the acute association of our Health and Human Services Secretary and Children's Health Defense with the mother of this young lady and her association with Robert Malone, including her appearance on stage in January of 2023 with Robert Malone and Asim Malhotra and a number of other foreign meddlers, Meryl Nass, an American trader, is all indication that this is one orchestration of a spectacular commitment to lies, where they have orchestrated some kind of replacement of our already criminal vaccine schedule with one that we will have assumed worked on the basis of that pandemic, on the basis of that theater where there were 2 years of people being murdered, and then the murder stopped. And they want you to think that the murder stopped because the transfections worked. And in reality, if we would have told college kids in 2020 that these are transfections not that dissimilar from what is used on the academic bench in the hospital attached to your university, that these aren't that different than what 1964 says this anonymous account, and agreed upon by the former research and development director of the Human Genome Project, Kevin McKernan, a person who I think has personally interfered with my ability to provide for my family to a criminal extent, that I think is a traitor to our grandchildren because he is part of a perhaps decade-long national security operation to make sure that nobody figured out that the vaccine schedule in America was wholly criminal, that nobody in Europe would figure it out, that nobody on the internet would figure it out in 2024, so much so that this same character, after 5 years of consistent performing, went on a podcast and lied about how the Health and Human Services Secretary's book was written. And I think he did this because they are in a desperate position, because it is in fact true that this whole entire lie is based on, this whole story is based on this commitment that molecular testing for, I've got to put a bite of this egg in my mouth. I'm going to lower the, and I got coffee to drink, and I'm going to splatter butter all over my nice shirt, which I don't really want to do. So I'm going to take that off right now, which is annoying because I probably already did it. But it's butter, so it'll probably come out if I get it wet right away. If you're listening, Fearla, you can come down and get my jacket. That silly butter just splattered all over me. So yeah, the whole idea is that Kevin McKernan is on the internet performing in the way that he's performing, not because he's a patriot, because he's doing actual work that he's paid to do. This is the reality of it. And so you can see this consistent track record of what he does. And remember, a lot of these posts are sent to me by other people because he's blocked me years ago. And this is just the level of malevolence that we're dealing with. It is a spectacular commitment to these lies. And that is the reason why someone like Mary Holland has been in place since roughly 2015, because she is not a failure. She is a meddler. If you think that Mary Holland has been fighting in earnest since 2015 when she was on Democracy Now!, then effectively that means she's a failure, because her message is still just rise and resist, people over profits, truth over lies, and courage over fear. That's it. It's really remarkable where we are, and I think if you just digest a little bit what's happening here and realize that from January 25th, 2020, when it was declared a lab leak by Steve Bannon, with, of course, he's a Catholic pro-China hawk. He has promoted CHD throughout the pandemic. He's a self-declared intellectual property expert, and he used to work for Goldman Sachs, the same bank that Aaron Siri used to work for. Kevin McKernan is also an intellectual property expert who's convinced that the FDA was corrupt and annoying and part of the reason why the pandemic ended up with so many people dead. Brett Weinstein is also, the son of an intellectual property expert that was the first intellectual property expert to be appointed to the Department of Justice by none other than the father of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the guy who's now Health and Human Services Secretary. And of course, we could consider these all happy little accidents, or you could see this almost flawless pattern of people that can't seem to tell you that PCR is not a useful diagnostic tool, can't seem to identify pure oxygen as a possible cause of ARDS and this death in hospitals, and not being able to articulate that, not giving antibiotics for pneumonia would be a crime tantamount to murder. It's not a accident. These are people that were put in place by the slavers that I'm calling team worst case scenario, that were supposed to convince us that a lab leak is not only possible, it is likely, and that the molecular biology to support this idea is not only possible, but obvious. And what this allowed to happen is that PCR as a medical diagnostic standard is now in place and being used to define these things going forward without needing FDA approval. Even if the emergency ends, a lot of these medical devices will just be grandfathered in. You can rest assured that that's the case, and that means that these remnant streams will be grandfathered in. Just a happy little accident that we're collecting DNA from everybody that goes into every hospital, every person that enrolls and matriculates at a university. It's just a happy little accident that all the people that are behind those words right there have some ties to the Department of Energy or to genetics or to vaccines. These would-be patriots, these would-be world, global leaders in the dissident movement, they are no less than global leaders and global influencers. And none of these people can explain to you why there's no epidemiological evidence of spread, even in this macro picture. None of these people have ever taken this picture and shown it to you to explain why this must be murder. They have never, ever shown you that you can actually see an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality in the graph. It's just visible. You can just look at the 50,000 line and then look at the 60,000 line and look at how all-cause deaths rise up to it. Stop dropping below 50,000 and start only dropping below 60,000. Where the peak of the deaths is around 60,000, it's now way above 80,000. Interesting. Looks like an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality was possibly sculpted using murder and sophisticated liars on the internet to create the myth of an RNA pandemic that no one could argue with unless they knew this. Just look. 2 eggs down. There we go. Thank you very much for that patience. But you can see what I'm talking about, right? It's not very hard to see it. And so we have a list of how that anticipated rise in all-cause mortality was sculpted using murder and sophisticated lies. We have a list. Not only was it the fear, uncertainty, and doubt and confusion and the do not resuscitate orders and the ventilators and the poor use of steroids that Robert Malone laughed about. It was not only the remdesivir and the midazolam that was used. It was not only starving people or dying of cold like they did in Scotland or depriving them of water. It was also death certificate fraud. It was also financial incentives that made everything classify as that. It was track and trace and masks and closures and mandates that all scared people into believing that PCR was real, that lateral flow testing was real, that the sequencing was real. And for 3 years straight, nobody mentioned the opioid deaths except for Mark Kulak. Actually, only one person on the internet, Mark Kulak. Nobody really explained how if a viral pneumonia is bullshit, then not using antibiotics is criminal. Nobody could explain, and this is remarkable, that there wasn't a doctor in the United States that happened to catch this Kyle Seidel's video where they're exposing people to 60 liters a minute of oxygen and didn't protest as that being dangerous. It's remarkable how apparently poorly trained most doctors in the United States and around the world actually are in the basics of intensive care. And so what you have to imagine instead is a team of performers with elaborate costumes and effects and scripts and lines and, they all know what they're going to do because they've all done the rehearsal. They've all been at the table read. And so what they did was they used this ongoing anticipated biological phenomenon, think of it like this train, and then pretended to have some effect on it. Not only that, but they agreed that each other was having an effect on it. So what you really need to be able to see is 4 or 5 people standing in front of this train performing the same little act that this guy in the stretch pants is performing. Because this act is important to understand, and it is especially important to understand how this act would be accentuated and enhanced if it was not just him, but it was also me and Mark Kulak and Jessica Rose and Pierre Corey and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. without a shirt on, and Robert Malone had a horse, and Jill Glasspool Malone was I don't know, holding some elaborate device that was plugged in and it looked like it ran down into the crack here where the track runs. And we were all agreeing, and Jill would call out, "All right, everybody, the train's coming in 3 seconds." And then, Robert would ride his horse all the way down to the end and pull a chain along there, and it would seem like, wow, what's he doing? And then we would all get ready to catch the train, and then at once we would all grab it, and once we stopped the train, I would give Jessica Rose a high five, and Pierre Corey would come over and give me a high five, and Mark Kulak would be over there, stretching his arms like this and adjusting the bib overalls he's wearing, and then we'd get ready to push the train out. It would be a lot more convincing than this guy, and still it wouldn't change the circumstances of the train. And what I'm arguing is that's what they did with this anticipated rise in all-cause mortality. They just got their costumes on, and when the train came in the station, they started performing. Brett Weinstein was performing. Eric Weinstein was performing. Peter Thiel knew there was going to be a performance. They all knew there was going to be a performance. James Lyons Weiler knew he was given a script. He knew he was being told. I mean, we just listened to Chris Martenson yesterday, so certain about what a calamity a pandemic would be, as if suddenly he's not interested in gold and the Federal Reserve anymore, but is just sure about virology. Because they were all told, come on, we gotta We all got to pretend we got to stop. Just come on. I'll explain it later. And 5 years later, they're still doing it. Some of them still don't even know why. Because there's so many people standing along this train that it actually seems plausible that they're doing something. Have you ever seen these giant tug of war things where there's like hundreds of people on either side of the rope? It's very hard to gauge what you yourself are actually doing when you pull on the rope, because there's hundreds of people on your side, and on the other side of the river there's hundreds of people over there. It's very hard to tell. What's more important is the more people there are, the less it matters what you do. And so in a situation like this, the more people that line up along the train and pretend to stop it, the more likely it is that any given dupe will not be able to tell that they're really not doing anything. And so this scenario, but applied to a social media platform where they have all the access to all the messages that they can communicate and read what you're doing, where there are anonymous accounts that they can use against you for the same purpose. Now you maybe are starting to conceive how this pandemic was always meant to be played. And why so many of our people, the leaders that are the people that are in positions of power, are so carefree and nonchalant, because they understand what they did as a group, lining up against this train and grunting and pulling really hard and getting their hands dirty and wiping it on their pants and going, I'm just trying to help. They know what they did. And they know that as long as they keep doing it, anybody that doesn't know what's happening will be fooled. They know that the illusion is requiring them to sustain their work, to sustain their smile. That's why you can see what happened in Australia differently now, what happened in New Zealand differently now, what happened with Kevin McCairn differently now, what happened with Kevin McKernan's timeline differently now, and everybody's timeline needs populating in order to understand when they got in on this performance and whether they can be forgiven for having come in when there were thousands of people lined up trying to stop the train, pretending with all of their might, so that it was pretty hard not to know. It was pretty hard to know that these people were fooled. Or were they part of an original group of people that decided we have to pretend? Because if we don't pretend, the criminal vaccine schedule in the United States will be exposed. And of course, the criminal vaccine schedule in the United States being exposed would be a huge problem for the Human Genome Project. It would be a huge problem for anybody that was interested in collecting genomes, you know, like the Claire Craig of the 100,000 Genomes Project in the UK. Like HIV virologist Jessica Rose, or longtime retrovirologist and postdoc of Murray Gardner, Robert Malone, or the country doctor and bioweapons expert from Australia and Rhodesia and America in Maine, Meryl Nass, whose son works at Google. Or maybe, I don't know, who else do you want to talk about here? The idea that Brett Weinstein's father and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s father were in the same Department of Justice and helped form the FDA. I mean, we are dealing right now, ladies and gentlemen, with a almost too obvious issue where there is a biological phenomenon and a world to govern. And you can do the math. You can do the math once you go look for it and realize that this signal has been foretold for like 20 years. They've been telling us for a very long time that was going to happen. Before the pandemic, I wouldn't have had to work very hard to convince my family and friends that these people might work together to create an illusion of consensus, that they might pay people to go on social media to create an illusion of consensus. But I'm still going to have trouble convincing a lot of my family and friends that these people were paid to go online and create an illusion of consensus in order to destroy America. Because that's what this ultimately is about. And I think it's really important for everybody in America on Team USA, which I don't have my jacket on now. I could probably put it back on, but darn it. I'm afraid it's got butter on it, though. Yeah, it's got butter on it, but I guess it'll come out. I'm not worried about it. We'll wear the butter. We'll wear the butter, clean the butter after the show. We will clean the butter after the show. There we go. Team USA, baby. And I think it's really important to state that out loud because I think everybody in the world right now should be on Team USA. And I don't mean Trump and I don't mean RFK. I mean Team USA like the US Constitution and the idea that the US system is on the brink and that there is something to be saved here, even if it can't be saved financially or mathematically. It can be saved on principle, and it can be saved on ideals. And those ideals, I think, are still very important to understand, are only codified in law here in America. It's the only place where we still have free speech, and real free speech, protected by the law. Whether or not it will actually be protected is another thing, but technically speaking, it's not written like that anywhere else. And so this Lollapalooza of liars that is composed of a lot of international meddlers is designed to create a general apathy toward America and a general disdain for America, and then eventually blame this big mess on America. I'm sure of it. Because again, the idea is to control, demolish America, as I said in July of 2020 from my backyard. And it makes perfect sense that there would be some key traders within the American system that would play a key role in making sure the American public would never wake up to the fact that our sovereignty was going to be inverted, that we were going to be used as experimental animals. And I think there's a very good argument to be made, and I think the only one making it is Mark Kulak, that the original intent of 9/11 was a bioterror attack, which would allow them to use an anthrax vaccine on the military. Now, the question becomes to me, and I'm still a little worried about this, and I think Mark needs to do a little work here. Since he's critiquing me, I'll critique him. In the sense of, I think that already a lot of troops that were shipped off to Iraq were already given that vaccine. And in fact, if this data port was set up, and as he says at Winber, to look at cancer back in the year 2000, I have no doubt that network is bigger and better now with the same intentions in mind. I only say this because I do have a friend who enlisted at some point because he was kind of lost. It was around the same time that I decided to do my PhD in the Netherlands. And he enlisted, and one of the first things that happened after basic training was they all got shots and they all were in the basement of a church, incredibly sick. And so again, the idea that you were using our military as experimental animals, I think is to be a foregone conclusion already before the pandemic, and that the pandemic was actually more about converting the entire population to the same status, or at least that was the original intention. Again, this is a crime scene. I don't know what these people were hired to do, but I do know if a couple of these people were to break, what they would have to admit would probably be absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, there's no way to explain why the Brownstone Institute exists. It's such a joke. If you listen to Jeffrey Tucker, if you read what he writes, it is such pretentious bullshit. And yet somehow or another they have enough money to have fellows that include lawyers and people like Jessica Rose and Brett Weinstein. It's not by accident. It's the same people that I call Team Worst Case Scenario, because all of these organizations are essentially part of this fake populist movement that seems to have been coordinated largely by Robert Malone and Kevin McKernan and Steve Bannon. And I don't mean coordinated. I mean, there's a script and only a few people really understand it. I don't think that Brett Weinstein has the sophistication of understanding of biology to get to the point where he can even imagine why DNA might be exaggerated. And I do think that Kevin McKernan understands that very well. I don't think that Steve Bannon gives a shit, although he might be sophisticated enough to understand that a lot of this is huff and puff. It's a lot of exaggeration. I don't think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is sophisticated enough to understand how long and by whom he's been manipulated. And I don't think any of us can blame him, because it's possible that since his father was killed, he has been experiencing a victimized as a Truman Show, where everybody that's been around him has been feeding him a limited spectrum of understanding that essentially defines his reality now. And so, you know, I don't think of him as a good or bad guy. I think of him as a good intending guy, mainly because unlike Kevin McKernan, who has gone out of his way to meddle and interfere with my ability to make a living, this guy gave me a job. This guy put me in his book. I have the feeling that in a lot of ways, some of these people that are more of the chess players here are frustrated that my name is so prominently featured in that book and will remain there in perpetuity. I plan to make sure that I hammer that for the rest of my life, because I think that a lot of these people were put in place and knew that they were in place to maintain this limited spectrum of debate where everybody feels like there's being progress made, except for those people who are actually aware of the position of the ball and whether or not it's moving. If you've never played football before, or let's call it rugby, because that makes a little more sense from the perspective of the scrum. If you've never played rugby before, you don't actually really know what's going on in there. I would argue that anybody that's played American football's got no frickin' idea what goes on inside of a rugby scrum. And in that scenario, anybody that's not been exposed to the tragedies of healthcare in America before, never really experienced it because they're just naive, then this will be a lot like your first rugby game. Wow, these people work together really well. It looks so cool how they do it. I can't believe it. All those rules, and it looks so neat, and look at those lines, and wow, those plays are exciting. I don't know how they organized that, but that looks so cool. That's what this was. This wasn't meant for the people that have been fighting against the vaccine schedule for years. Like, it wasn't meant for the fans of Brian Hooker. It wasn't meant for the fans of this lady here. This was meant for the people who didn't know anything about anything before. This wasn't meant for people that knew who Brandy Vaughn was, that's for sure. And them going to Romania a couple months before to rehearse all of the same presentations with all of the same people, well, that wasn't a happy little accident either. These people having been off the coast of Turkey on a cruise together for a week the year before this is not an accident. Hot tub pictures and shoe pictures, these are not accidents. These are the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses. And to a certain extent, you could see it as a populist movement global, where this network flexed its strength global, trying to show the power of social media networks on a global scale to herd cats like never before. Almost like a noosphere, you know, something that Teilhard de Chardin talked about, where the entire consciousness of humanity becomes one. I assure you that the social media platforms would love us to start using them to that extent, because then they can really control our countries. Maybe they could even create a very lively debate within that spectrum, which would get us to essentially decide to dissolve our national borders and to, sort of just accede to a global governance. Maybe that's the reason why a lot of these people seem to have allegiances outside of the United States, seem to have allegiances to invisible weaponized piles of money. You can't think of Peter Thiel as an American. He can't think of Elon Musk as an American. So why are we allowing these people to have so much influence over us via these social media platforms upon which they pay people to proselytize? This is absolutely positively a Lollapalooza of liars. And from my own personal perspective, this is the starting lineup for Team Worst Case Scenario. There can be others. I don't have Judy Mikovits on here because I've never had any real personal interaction with her, although she definitely belongs on here. I don't have Mickey Willis on here or Del Bigtree on here because I've never had any personal interaction with them. These are all people that I've had extensive conversations with, multiple Zoom meetings, tried to convince them that, you know, some of this stuff is worth saying. That's why these people are here. And they all ignore the fact that there was an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality that can explain all of the death. All of it. But what they needed to do was push this together. And that's what makes it malevolent. They needed a specific signal, which Mark Kulak, it particularly sticks in his teeth because he's the one who kind of figured it out. You know, changing flu deaths to COVID doesn't kill any more people. A rise in all-cause mortality is provided by an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality, provided by death certificate fraud, and provided by Murr Diddley Erdler. It's got to be Murr Diddley Erdler. I'm saying it like Flanders. It's got to be murder in order to get these peaks. It doesn't have to all be the same kind of murder. It can be neglect and starvation and lack of antibiotic use for urinary tract infections and remdesivir and midazolam and starving. And it can be all of those things in different places. As long as you understand that they needed to kill people or this never would have happened. Yes, there would be a signal. Just like every other year, there would have been a signal in the winter, but it would not have been like this. This only happened in hospitals. There wasn't a wave of severe COVID that swept our neighborhoods and left people dead in their house. That happened in New York City because they didn't resuscitate people. That did not happen because of COVID. This is murder, and it is a myth that they have created. And so I think it's time to put some stuff on a timeline. Sorry, it's 44 minutes in. I wanted to do that faster, but I never do it fast. I'm kind of happy that it's just butter. I think it'll come out. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with it. I just got this jacket. I love all these jackets. I think they're so great. Since I was a young boy, I thought that the Dream Team was super cool. A young man, and I really just, I don't know, for some reason I finally decided what I wanted to make that YouTube channel about and the theme I wanted to make it on, and so I'm super excited about it. And I hope you are too. Gigaohmbiological.com is the place where you can go if you want to support this stream, because we are supported only by viewers like you. Thank you very much for all those people that do support. Again, we are trying to be on a timeline here, trying to explain what this Lollapalooza of liars has done, what they have ignored, what they haven't told you, and how they did it, how they accomplished it, what this limited spectrum of debate was actually. And what it was, of course, was this mystery. And how you can see it are the ways that they ignore each other as well. One of the recent examples I gave was the fact that the NCI in Canada is listing Jessica Rose a Brownstone Fellow, which means she gets money from Brownstone, and an IMA Senior Fellow, which means she gets money from that. And she has a lucrative Substack, and she's a surfer, is a Canadian researcher with 5 post-secondary degrees. And that is a lie. A post-secondary degree, what they mean is a postdoc. And they all know that that's a really bullshit line. She's never even had a faculty position. So these degrees just mean that she spent some time in somebody's lab that you could call a molecular biologist, that you could call an immunologist, that you could call a computational biology lab. And so then she has a degree in that. If I did a postdoc in a lab that was a molecular neuropsychiatry lab, do I have a degree in neuropsychiatry? Apparently. And so this lie, which is really a bold lie from someone who has hundreds of thousands of followers and has convinced hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that the spike protein in 2021 was to be feared, that the spike protein might be the cause of all kinds of things, and that VAERS was showing a signal that it had never shown before. This person is completely ignored by these no virus people that have spent lots and lots of time attacking me, writing letters about me, doing streams about me, even streaming with other people about me, but never even mentioned Robert Malone or Jessica Rose. Never even mentioned them. And that's how you can see that it is one coordinated sort of operation where these people are all playing some role that is akin to like Epigirl in the SPARS pandemic document.
JJ?
Sorry, yes, go ahead. And so that's why, again, I put this here. All these people ignore Jessica Rose's blatantly fraudulent CV, blatantly fraudulent claims of expertise, blatantly obvious CV with NATO-supported postdocs and virology that includes simulations of viral replication and also like something to do with HIV. And all of these people who claim none of those things exist ignore the one that claims not only do they exist, but she's got 5 degrees in it. That's what this lively debate is. That's what the limited spectrum is. And so then you interact with these people on social media and you think you're making progress, but you're really not, because the cartoon was already written. The play was already written. These people already have their lines, and so they can incorporate you with a little impromptu improvisation, but they don't need to worry because they know that you're not going to be in the next scene anyway. And I experienced this over and over and over again during the pandemic, group after group after group that held me on for about 9 months each time, making me run in their hamster wheel, thinking that if I could just convince this group, then I would make progress. And then they threw me out. Then I would get in another group and then they would eventually ignore me. Then I'd get in another group and they'd eventually ignore. And this happened many, many, many times over 5 years. And the truths that have come out of it is that transfection in healthy people is wrong, that basically RNA virology is based on synthetic recombinant DNA, and that an intramuscular injection of medicine is probably dumb. And since I've said it, no one has ever been able to say, yeah, but. And we're still left with the history of Brandy Vaughn, right? The one that was putting up billboards in San Francisco in 2016 that said all vaccines do is harm people. The same Brandy Vaughn that's in this picture with Del Bigtree and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and James Lyons Weiler and Judy Mikovits in 2019 and who dies in December of 2020. They all got in front of her. They all had a limited spectrum of debate that they were told to enforce, write a book about, and you'll be okay. You'll be part of this. James Lyons Weiler is a traitor to our grandkids. Paul Thomas is probably an unwitting participant, although at this point he's got to be sophisticated enough to understand that a delayed vaccine schedule is bullshit. It might be safer than no vaccines because development is real. In other words, if the earlier you vaccinate, the earlier you poison a baby, the worse off they are. So if you really want to screw up a fetus, you should do it in, at the 36 cell stage or something like that, or the 64 cell stage, when the entire organism can be screwed up. That will usually result in an abortion, a miscarriage. So this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with, it's a limited spectrum of debate again, because it's true. A delayed vaccine schedule, if you could delay all the shots until they're 2 years old, there's no doubt that those kids will be better off than the kids that it wasn't delayed in. That doesn't mean that they'll be great. It doesn't mean that intramuscular injection is okay at age 2. It does mean it's less dangerous, just like probably shooting a newborn in the chest is more dangerous than shooting a 20-year-old in the chest. And Stephanie Seneff, of course, of MIT computer science fame, is sure that the autism epidemic is going to be 1 in 2 children by 2060, and it's all because of glyphosate, like Robert Malone just recently wrote on his Substack in 2025. So just listen to Polly.
That the other side, without a doubt, do not want the public, the people, the parents, to hear the stories of the unvaccinated. They want us to talk about MMR, autism, Andrew Wakefield. They want that to go down the same path every single time because they can attack us. But you cannot attack the generations and generations of the health of the unvaccinated. Vax2 doesn't even begin to cover the health of the unvaccinated. We uncovered so much. We uncovered generations and generations standing there saying, we've never had any cancer in our family. We've never had rheumatoid arthritis in our family. We've never had diabetes. We've never had any of these things that you see that are just common elderly conditions.
Now, what does this also suggest that I've never said before, which I should have said before? It suggests, of course, a very malevolent reasoning for why they would look for genes for cancer. Of course, if my posit is correct and that cancer is different every time it happens, then but it can all be basically based on similar mechanisms, but it happens for different reasons. Just like a flat tire is not a uniform cause. Boy, we're studying and we just can't figure it out. That this idea that vaccine damage occurs is the only thing we need to think about, and not try to define it amongst a small number of manifestations. And that is a very, very important message that she's saying here. If we talk about Wakefield and autism, then we're missing out on the fact that unvaccinated kids are ridiculously healthy and intelligent and beautiful and never get sick and don't have cancer. And it actually is, you can see it in families. And so what's important to understand is that people like Kevin McKernan and his brothers are working on cures that are based on the idea that there are genetic causes for cancer. And that's very different than the dysregulation of a particular gene, and that's how cancer is manifesting. That's not the cause, that's the mechanism. And they want you to think it's the cause. The gene is not the cause. Just because you have race tires on your car doesn't mean that that explains why the nail pops your tire and doesn't pop his tire. No, that only works for people with mine-proof tires. Then those guys, there's an explanation. But the difference between my tires and race tires are negligible if you have the right puncture. And I think this is extraordinary. I think this is really important to see, because one of the pretenses of the Human Genome Project is based on this idea that cancer has a genetic cause. It is a genetic dysregulation. Therefore, it needs a genetic solution. This is a real impetus in cancer biology that goes across subfields. And so it's important to see this unifying idea that, wait a minute, they're telling us that the transfection is causing turbo cancers. Mark Kulak has uncovered this network that was set up specifically to back up and store data about something to do with the health of the American military around the same time that they were talking about revamping a vaccine schedule in the military. And who was arguing about that on some random congressional call? Robert Malone, Meryl Nass, Vera Sharav. In 2011? Or when was that? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody's in the chat that can correct this. This is the central message here. That at some point in time, a lot of these people have said it very, very well. It's even possible that Brandy had so much positive influence on Polly that Polly was finally trying to say it right and actually getting better at saying it right. That they want you to argue about Wakefield. That's an amazing statement coming from someone who essentially moved to the United States with Andrew Wakefield to do the same thing that she did in the UK. She had to know that she was being moved over here to do the same thing that she did in the UK. She was on like 90 billboards in the UK. She helped elect a prime minister. Sorry.
They don't.
And so that's why James Lyons Weiler was at the beginning of the pandemic where he was, knowing what he was, and why he's in this weird photo. That's the reason why Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is promoting Judy Mikovits by telling her story from his house with her present in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. They are actually taking over, stepping in front of this narrative to be the populist resistance to the COVID narrative and make sure that there were no legitimate actors like Brandy Vaughn having any real influence. About 5 months after this, Brandy would be dead. Right? I mean, that's the reality. Like 10 months after the lab leak is declared by Steve Bannon, 10 months after, Kevin McKernan has done his podcast series with the Vance Crowe guy from the World Bank, 10 months of Brett Weinstein performing the glasses, woodshop goggles, and bandana act, and the lockdowns work, and we should still be going for zero COVID. Brandy's dead. 6 months after Brandy's dead is when Robert Malone comes on Brett Weinstein's podcast for the first time. Now, I know I use this all the time, but I want to use it again. Please hear this just for what it is. They put people in place. There is no way to explain this. And I know it's easy to see with somebody like Shapiro, somebody like this English guy, can't remember his name off the top of my head, sorry, Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan is put in place by somebody who pays him to be there, right? It's harder to see that actually Ben Shapiro was also done like this. That's how they do it. They groom them, not in a weird way, just like you do in the minor leagues. First, he's a guest a few times. They give him a Breitbart thing, and then, he rises. It's the same thing they did with all of these people. That's why in 2015 and in 2025, we're still arguing with Paul Offit, who was first arguing with Mary Holland. And now I want to go back to 2013 and listen to this, which you can also find on my website, stream.gigaohm.bio. I'm going to briefly pause here to get this clipped out and put it here in the chat. There you go. And then I'm going to open this thing and I'm going to listen to it. Let me see where I put it. Where did I put it? Here? Yes. So we're listening to this recording.
Well, my baby was a child so strong. Healthy baby never did no wrong. Then we took her to that infant doctor. a needle and shot her. That evening, she stopped breathing, her face turned blue.
Good to see everybody in the chat. I haven't been reading it very much. I apologize.
There was nothing we could do, Lord, nothing we could.
While this is playing in, I would remind you that when we went to the Brownstone,
I will introduce the other folks in just a second, but as always, I must speak to...
when we went to the Brownstone event in November of 2024, it was the same weekend that we had the live Gigaohm event here in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. And Mark Kulak and I and Joe Marshall went to the Brownstone meeting that was in Pittsburgh. And at that event, Jeffrey Tucker came over to me, not knowing who I was. And I don't remember exactly how he said it, but he said something like, "I don't think you're having a very good time here. And I want to know if you're having a good time, and then I don't want you to do something." I don't know what it was, confront other people. He didn't declare that I was going to be violent or anything like that, but he did come over to warn me somehow. It was weird. And he didn't come over to warn me in a nice way. It was really, very attempting to be intimidating. Of course, he wasn't as tall as me, and his handshake, like they all are, was very clammy and weak. And so it's hard to intimidate somebody like that. But he tried. He's the guy with the big bow tie and stuff. And what's neat is that Mark was standing right there, and he could see that I was about ready. Something was about to break. And so he just kind of stepped in and said, "Hey, I'm Mark Kulak," and started talking to him and laid it right to him, like went right to the hole and dunked. He's just like, I don't know if you're aware, but the whole drop in life expectancy in America can basically be explained by the opioid pandemic, and none of these fools are saying it, and somebody should say it. And it was pretty extraordinary because he said that, that's very interesting. I have to look into it. And of course, he hasn't said anything since. Okay, so let's let this go. Remember, this is Brian Hooker. And it is in 2013.
The music you just heard, because of what I just heard. There was nothing we could do. He could not stop his young 5-week-old infant daughter from dying in front of his eyes. 5 weeks old, healthy, vibrant, given a Hep B shot, and died 15 hours later. And it's hard to discuss it. I can't imagine what it's like to go through the actual experience. And of course, the one who suffered the most was the poor little infant girl. But the other insidious and most insidious aspect of this whole story is that they found what was obviously vaccine damage. It was brain damage in the coroner's office in the days following the little girl's death. And they informed the family of this. A coroner called the family and spoke to Mr. Belkin and told him on the phone, "We found brain damage in your daughter." Brain damage is the indication of an encephalitic reaction to a vaccine. It's a common, serious adverse reaction. In the Merck manual, vaccines are listed as a cause of encephalitis. And yet, a few days later, Mr. Belkin got another phone call that drew him down to the coroner's office, standing face to face with that same woman, who now adopted a very different, told Mr. Belkin that they were going to list the girl's death as sudden infant death syndrome, while the coroner's supervisor sat across the room, carefully monitoring the conversation. So this was coming down from the hierarchy. It was being...
And so the first thing to get from this, all right, in case you're not processing it yet, is that SIDS, when we were growing up, was a lie. That's the best way to say it. When we were growing up, they did 60 Minutes about SIDS. They did, news spots about SIDS. SIDS was a lie. SIDS is vaccine death. Plain and simple. SIDS is vaccine mythology.
Sure, through virtual surveillance right there in her office, that a new message was given to the Belkins. And not surprising, Mr. Belkin has been very, very active in the vaccine awareness community since. They have two other kids. One of them now plays drums in his band. It's called the Refusers. The name based on the fact that once you're vaccine aware, you refuse the vaccinations. And there is not a mention anywhere to be found in the little girl's record of the brain damage. Okay, that having been said, let's get to our guest. I'm glad to welcome Brian Hooker, who is a PhD in biochemical engineering, to the program. Hi, Brian. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sean. Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Sure. And again, folks, I'm here with co-host for today, at least, Sherry Knockin, known as Vaccine Dangers in the vaccine awareness world. Sherry's been a homeopath for several decades and very active in the vaccine awareness community. Okay, Brian, would you please tell us what it was that initially brought you to research vaccines? And then we'll get into some of the very active work you have participated in, for instance, helping instigate the recent congressional hearings, the newly held congressional hearings on autism.
Right. Well, my background and training is specifically in biotechnology, and I spent a sizable portion of my career working on making hemophilia drugs with plants, actually with genetically modified plants, which is a whole other topic. I don't appreciate what's going on right now with GMOs. In fact, when I was working with my plants, they were only for medicinal purposes. They were not for human consumption in terms of food substances. The whole thing is very alarming. I don't want to get off topic, but I do want to have that proviso.
So that's already very funny, right? Because he worked on genetically modified plants to make medicines for hemophiliacs. And that is so not very far away from what Kevin McKernan would like to do with all of his weed genetics and weed breeding and whatever else they're doing. He says that it's about, virions and pathogens. It's not at all. It's about transitioning to personalized medicine and what different ways personalized medicine will actually manifest itself. And one of them will be personalized weed. I'm sure of it. Why not? But from the perspective of his understanding of what's going on, he could not have worked for years on genetically modified plants and modifying the genetics of plants without understanding what transfection and transformation were. It's impossible. It's also impossible that he doesn't know that the SV40 story is bullshit. It's not possible. He probably used SV40 in those 15 years of transforming plants at some point and was exposed to that same pathogen and all the potential it has to express things in your gut just like now. It's just absurd to think that they're telling that story. But even worse is that to think that this guy who's telling you right now in 2013 that he has 15 years or 16 years of experience in biotechnology with genetically modified plants claims he didn't know what transfection was in 2020. Claims that he's just calling them vaccines because, they're vaccines. That's what Fauci and Collins say they are. Kevin McKernan says they're vaccines. I guess they're vaccines. I'm trying not to be upset here. But what I'm trying to suggest to you is and remind you is that I was a staff scientist under the direct supervision of Brian Hooker at Children's Health Defense. And I did not know that he had 16 years working on genetically modified plants when I told him about transfection. And he certainly didn't tell me that he knew all about SV40 and DNA plasmids and transformation because he has 15 years of experience doing it for the government.
Before I sort of launch into anything else. But I was very in tune with the FDA regulatory process, how that applied to biologics, biologic products, and so forth. And I was also very much active in statistical analysis.
So the FDA regulatory process with regard to biologics, which is a really interesting thing, of course, that was central to the pandemic narrative, and that obfuscating the truth of that was central to the pandemic narrative. What an interesting thing to be an expert in 2013.
And so I did a lot of, as a part of my graduate work, as a part of my career, I was a researcher at a national laboratory for 17 years. I was doing a lot of statistical analysis in line with these biological products that we were trying to produce. So I had a lot of experience in biotechnology and in the drug industry as well. But I did not know very much about vaccines except for what my pediatrician.
Doesn't that sound a lot like Brandy? Doesn't that sound a lot like Brandy? You have a lot of expertise and everything else, but I just didn't know vaccines were so shitty and so different and so dumb. Wow, this is extraordinary. He's got all the requisite background knowledge in 2013 to know everything that my dumb ass didn't figure out until 2022.
Told me, my son's pediatrician, my son had all of his vaccinations on time. His name is Steve, and he's 15 years old now. He was born in 1998, and virtually every vaccine that he received that could have thimerosal is the mercury-containing organic preservative that they used in vaccines and still use in some instances. But he had got a very, very high dose of thimerosal in his infant vaccines, and then he basically reached a toxic tipping point at about 15 months and regressed into a condition that we will not call autism. I don't like the word autism. He was vaccine damaged. He was neurologically damaged, and he's still suffering with many of the effects of that initial damage done at 15 months. And so he regressed rather.
And so here's Brian Hooker explaining very clearly that he doesn't like the word autism because he doesn't think it's adequate to describe what happened. It's inaccurate. It's misleading. I don't know why he doesn't like it, but it's obvious. His son is vaccine damaged. If you got hit by a car and then they called it autism, you wouldn't really want it to be called autism. You'd want to say that, well, my son was hit by a car. That's why he's in a wheelchair. He's not handicapped because it's genetic. He's not handicapped because he had some gene called MTFR. That's the illusion that they are teaching our children, that they are teaching in universities, that these academic biologists are unwittingly perpetuating. The idea is very obvious now if you listen to this 2013 Brian Hooker person. It's not, I don't like the word autism either, quite frankly. I don't think anyone likes that word. I think it's much better to call it what he just said.
Regressed into a condition that we will not call autism. I don't like the word autism. He was vaccine damaged. He was neurologically damaged, and he's still suffering with many of the effects of that initial damage done at 15 months. And so he regressed.
And so this is not a genetic cause, an environmental cause. This is an acute neurological assault. Don't call it autism if he got hit by a car. You would never call it autism if he was playing baseball and took an aluminum baseball bat to his temple. He wouldn't say, well, my kid's got autism. And that is what this person, 2013 Brian Hooker, is very, very clearly saying.
Rather quickly into neurological difficulties. He lost language, and we lost eye contact. He was staring at lights, things like that, and within weeks of the initial vaccinations, he got 5 vaccines while he had an active ear infection, which is a big no-no. It's contraindicated even if you look at the packet insert. But within weeks, we saw profound regression, and it continued in a downward cycle until he was about 2 years old, and then it started to stabilize at that point.
Okay, and you as a parent, there's not a single doubt in your mind about the connection between the vaccinations and the subsequent regression?
No, not at all. It was apparent at the time that he received the vaccines, and it was...
Just to be aware, I am playing this at 1.33 speed, so Brian doesn't talk faster in the past, just to make sure you know.
And pointed out I didn't even know that the vaccinations that he received contained mercury until we had the fortunate experience of working with a specialist who was a part of the Defeat Autism Now movement when my son was about 30 months old. But that physician alerted us, and who became, essentially my son's primary doctor at that point, is that thimerosal was in the vaccines, and we did the calculation, and I was astounded by the amount of mercury that my son received in the vaccines. Not only that, but as my knowledge has grown, I'm astounded, and I continue to be astounded by the poor design of these particular therapeutics and the poor rationale for vaccinating in the first place.
The poor rationale for vaccinating in the first place. It sounds like he's very close to saying that vaccination, as it currently manifests, which is intramuscular injection, is dumb. Sounds like he's trying to say it's sophisticated enough so that he can't get shot for it, but he pretty much knows already that it's just dumb. And so after all this time, I guess big top tent of health freedom is really as far as he's gotten.
Gotcha. Let me ask you, what were your doctors, several or one, if that was the case, immediate reaction to, I'm sure, what was a call to them to describe what the consequences were after the vaccinations?
It was pretty much dismissal. That it's just an unfortunate coincidence. We had to file the VAERS report. When a child is vaccine injured, the physician is supposed to file a report with what the CDC calls VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting Service system. Excuse me. And the physician would not file the report. We had to file the report directly. And my wife and I, and also my mother, who was a former public health nurse, filed the VAERS report and did the VAERS follow-up. And the physician didn't want any part of it. And quite frankly, at that point, we didn't really want any part of her, and we found a new pediatrician right away.
Understood. And so everybody in the audience realizes that theirs is a system that is supposed to record any events that take place temporally related to the vaccinations. And they don't necessarily have to be claimed by the physician at all as being causally related by the vaccines. That is supposed to be determined by further research. But the events are supposed to be reported. This system was set up in 1986 with the act that also removed the liability from the vaccine industry for any damage that their toxic brews may cause. But that's why the system was set up, to keep track, ostensibly, of the events. But they're only supposed to be reports of events that are temporally related, as were the events that took place in your son's life after the vaccines he was given. There's no excuse in the world for the physician to have refused to associate herself with a VAERS report.
It was very difficult, and
just to address something in the chat where Reginald says the kids are not all right, I tend to agree with you. If you hit your kid over the head with a baseball bat and tomorrow he seems okay, is he? Are you ever going to know? I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. That is reality. And now we're doing the same thing with social media with our kids over years of time, where we're just like, well, whatever, they're on it, so I guess they're on it. That's what all the kids are doing, so whatever. Even if it could permanently screw them up emotionally or socially, well, I don't know, I guess it's just going to happen then. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be remembered as a group of adults that were abject failures to our children if we don't rise and resist right now in a real way and know what we're rising against and know what we're resisting. No more abstract bullshit. We need to be like 2013 Brian Hooker, apparently.
We were questioned a lot in terms of our intent and our scientific acumen. It was a little easier for me because, I have a PhD in biochemical engineering, so I could look at the evidence and say, yeah, we need to file a VAERS report. And the physician, of course, most physicians will attempt to talk down, allopaths will attempt to talk down to their patients and the parents. But at this point, I had a scientific background. I don't know if I did not have the background, I don't know if I would have filed the VAERS report. I don't know if I would have pushed it because it took a lot of pushing to do.
Well, you can see right there how there's such a room for non-reporting. One of the former FDA commissioners, Kessler, thought it was maybe only 1% are reported. And it's a law that they have to report it, but there is no teeth in that law, no consequences.
There's absolutely none. And I would say 1% would be about right. And if you look at 1% in the VAERS reports, the VAERS is publicly accessible. You can do a Google search on VAERS, and the public can access that database. Also, there's a better website that has a better interface to the database by the National Vaccination Information Center, the National Vaccine Information Center by Barbara Lowe Fisher, her organization. And you can look at the actual adverse events reports. And the things that are astounding are the numbers. If that's really 1%, of all the vaccine injuries that occur in the United States, there are many more vaccine injuries than have ever been, than the pharmaceutical industry or the CDC would ever let.
Absolutely. From the music, obviously, we're coming down to the first break. This is the vaccine myth and issue of trust. And yes, I'll point out that there are over 5,000 VAERS reports of vaccine-associated deaths alone. Hang on. Biomedicine. And Brian, let's talk about host and Brian Hooker, who is a PhD in biochemical engineering. He said he specialized in biomedicine. And Brian, let's talk about malfeasance in general, if you would, sir.
Well, I appreciate you having me on the show. I started to get involved and interested in the whole issue of scientific malfeasance, specifically within the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, regarding vaccines and autism back in 2004. And I was following the Institute of Medicine at the time was having what they called the Immunization Review Committee. And the review committee actually held a series of 9 meetings. And the final meeting, which was in 2004, basically the Immunization Safety Review Committee declared that there was no relationship between vaccines and autism. They only considered 2 issues, which is really less than tip of the iceberg. They looked at the MMR in autism, based on what they did to disparage Andy Wakefield's work. And I'm a good friend of Andy's, and I have incredible respect for his scientific veracity. He's one of the few MDs that I know actually does good research. MDs tend to be fairly poor researchers, if I can make a broad brush, but Andy is so impeccable with his work. But getting back to the Institute of Medicine, they looked at the MMR and said that there's no relationship between the MMR and autism, despite lots of evidence to the contrary. And then with the thimerosal, they looked and said that there was no evidence that there was a connection between thimerosal and autism. And specifically on the thimerosal issue, they only looked at epidemiology, and the only epidemiology that they looked at were these 5 studies that were directly tied to the Centers for Disease Control. And as a parent and as a scientist, that really didn't pass the smell test for me. And so I started to look at what CDC was claiming in these studies, and going to the open scientific literature and going through the statistics. And the more concerned that I got, the greater my desire was to get the background information. And so I started submitting Freedom of Information Act requests in 2004 to the CDC and also to the FDA, as well as the other branches within the HHS that are specific around the vaccination program for the United States. Since that time, I've submitted about 120 FOIA requests to the CDC. And as the information started to come out, as the CDC very sparingly was sharing information to me, I saw a consistent pattern to cover up any type of vaccine adverse event in general, especially if it was neurological sequelae to vaccine. There is just a concerted effort on their part to commit.
I just want to state this here. It strikes me as odd that he sent 120 FOIA requests. And let me say why. Because in order to get a FOIA request for free, you need to claim you're a media person, and you need to claim you are a journalist. Otherwise, they can charge you. So 120 requests is a lot of requests. Like, in all these years, I haven't actually managed to file one yet. I'm thinking about filing a bunch, but it's very different to say you've filed 120 and also gotten results, which is in and of itself quite extraordinary. I'm not saying it's wrong or incorrect. It's notable.
Fraud, to cherry pick data, to minimize results that are reported, and to always come down on the side that vaccines do not cause neurological damage, period.
Right. And these are the folks who are supposed to be guarding the health of the nation.
Oh, yeah. The CDC's paradigm that they use is that vaccines are safe until proven otherwise. And first of all, that's completely backwards. the government the onus should be on their backs to prove that anything that I put in my body or my child's body or my wife's body or anybody, and remember, vaccinations are mandated by law. And even the exemptions, the pharmaceutical industry and the CDC are trying very, very hard to make sure that those go away. And so, therefore, they should be guaranteeing the safety of the things that they are saying that I need to put in my body or in my child's body. But they're saying that vaccines are safe until proven otherwise. That's a totally wrong paradigm. And then also from the information that I've seen via the FOIA, whenever they see an adverse event or whenever they see a connection between a vaccine or a vaccine component and an adverse event like autism, then they will work their magic to cover it up. Okay.
Yeah, they will. And I'd like to point out that they have another little ace up their sleeve, if you will, in Orwell speak, in the opposite speak to us, to you as a parent, to me as a grandparent, and to the millions of parents out there. The word safe means will not harm. But to the vaccine industry, the word safe means the benefits outweigh the risks. And then they won't talk about the risks.
Right, and even from that perspective, I would dare say on a population basis that that's really true. But really, these are not decisions that should be made on a population basis. As a parent, you really only care about the population of your children.
Wait, did he say
that's really true?
About the risks.
Right, and even from that perspective, I would dare say on a population basis that that's really true.
Oh, so vaccines on a population basis really do work. He just said that.
About the risks.
Right, and even from that perspective, I would dare say on a population basis that that's really true. But really, these are not decisions that should be made on a population basis. As a parent, you really only care about the population of your children in assuring the health and safety of your children. Whereas the CDC and the HHS as a whole, going all the way up to Kathleen Sebelius, they are...
So wait, is the vaccine and the rationale for vaccinating kids good or not? Because if it's not good, then he should be advocating for it to end. But now he's saying that on a population basis, it could be good. Holy shit, what's going on here?
More interested in population dynamics, and they look at vaccine adverse events, life-changing, life-altering, life-ending events as acceptable damages in the war on infectious disease. And these things aren't known. I mean, these people are making decisions, and they're deciding to sacrifice thousands, tens of thousands, I believe, coming up on millions of children in the name of this sort of wrong-headed notion that these infections are going to ravage our population if 90% or so aren't vaccinated.
Well, it kind of flies in the face of the fact that in my opinion, they are well aware of the fact that over 50% of the population now is affected by vaccine influenced, if you will, neurological damage. Everything from ADHD to a muscle twitch to asthma to diabetes to encephalitis to the rash of epidemics, the epidemic of epidemics, if you will, that we have of juvenile disorders that we've never used to see in juveniles: diabetes, asthma, rheumatoid arthritis.
We're talking about this in 2013, guys. So there's two ways to see Brian Hooker. He's been fighting for, I mean, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Like 12 years? 13 years? And he went from sounding pretty good, sort of, kind of. They kind of work on a population basis, but the decision should be every parent's. I mean, I don't know what to say.
One of my sons dated a woman, a very nice lady, a few years ago, a 3-year-old kid that while we were in relation with her was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. 3 years old.
That's just impossible. If anybody had described this type of scenario 20 years ago, then...
I'm going to err on the side of saying that he's probably being overly cautious when he says that, well, on a population basis, they seem to work. Maybe not knowing that actually on a population basis, they only seem to work because we take care to not get shit in our mouths, that we take care to wash our hands, that we drink clean water. Maybe he's not acutely aware that shell game was played in the 50s yet. It's possible, because for the most part, he's saying that there's the rationale. He just said it. The rationale for vaccinating doesn't make sense to him.
most scientists and physicians would have said, no way, no how. That just can't happen so quickly. But if you look at how the vaccination schedule has grown since 1986, since essentially the passing of the Childhood Vaccine Safety Act of 1986 and the establishment of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program subsequently in 1988, because of the liability shield, and vaccinations have a liability shield. You cannot sue the manufacturer for design defects because the Supreme Court has ruled that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. That is directly from the ruling. Okay, nobody's saying at the Supreme Court that vaccines are safe. They're saying that they're unavoidably unsafe, and so therefore they're using that as impetus to keep you from suing the manufacturers. And the manufacturers are having a field day in the pipeline for vaccinations, for new drugs and new vaccines. In biotech is actually 3 times greater than the pipeline of development of other biological drugs. I mean, they're really taking over the market because large pharmaceutical companies like Merck, Wyeth, Sanofi Pasteur are making a very, very large amount of profit.
And you never heard any of those names throughout the entire pandemic, not one of them.
Profits from childhood vaccines that are now being mandated by law. And at this point, there's 49 vaccinations that U.S. children have to receive by age 6. And that's opposed to countries like Denmark that has 11, Iceland that has 10.
Why don't they say that every day? Why isn't that the main message of CHD? End the criminal vaccine schedule in America. It's very simple. Compare it to Denmark. They're not all dead.
And we keep on hearing these horrible infectious diseases that are going to ravage our population if we don't get all 49 of these vaccines. But yet other countries are existing just fine with and actually are doing much, much better in terms of child mortality, overall child health. And we're watching the health of children decline in the United States as we add more vaccines to the schedule, specifically so we can make pharmaceutical companies rich.
So what?
If you consider the
How did the message?
And by the schedule right now, 2-year-olds have received 115 doses of vaccine. Hang on, we'll be back after a break.
How is it possible that in 2013 they were there, and in 2025, after a pandemic of 5 years, we haven't gotten anywhere?
I missed the message.
How is it possible?
Folks, we're joined by Nancy Novak's of Nancy Novak's fame, our intrepid co-host for most of the last year. And so we are now here with Nancy and Sherry Knockin, homeopath, and Brian Hooker, PhD in biochemical engineering, specialty in biomedicine. Obviously an experienced and astute researcher who knows what he's talking about when he starts looking at the studies, because that's
obviously an astute researcher who knew what transformation and transfection were at the beginning of the pandemic and could have explained it better than me. Knew what recombinant DNA was and how it's grown, how they use it to transform plants and cell cultures. He knew it all. And he knew that they were lying and calling transformation and transfection investigational vaccines, and he chose not to do anything about it. He chose to take a salary to stand in front of Brandy Vaughn and not tell any Americans the truth, and he still essentially hasn't saved a significant number of kids from any damage. Because you're not going to find really Brian Hooker or Children's Health Defense until after the damage happens. That's why I gave my kids their shots while I was working for Children's Health Defense. Because their messaging is so shitty that you can get a job for them as a staff scientist and as a scientific advisor and get a book published without knowing that the vaccine schedule is criminal and that you shouldn't give your kids any shots. Duh.
His expertise, that's his discipline, is the academic side of it. So his words are valuable to us. So let's go on. Brian, if you want to talk any more about the malfeasance, that's fine with me. I'll point out that as I said before, I hinted at it, saying, well, I think that the overall effect of the vaccines, in essence, is so damaging at this point to such a large percentage of the population that the CDC, for a long time, for many years, has had no leg to stand on to use the argument, the philosophy, if you will, that it's safe because it's only a few percentage of the population that are really damaged. That's not the case at all. And they're the ones that know, because as we've all pointed out so many times, they're the ones who are actively suppressing the information about the damage being done.
Can I add something? I'm a pediatric nurse to begin with. I graduated in 1971. My mother's a pediatric nurse. I worked in my pediatrician's office in high school, and I later was an office manager. So I worked in the late 60s and early 70s and 80s in pediatrics. I had worked in a busy 4-person pediatrician office in a big city, and not one autism. I never learned about autism in school. I never saw autism, never, ever. We had one child with asthma. We had one child with hemophilia, which is a different story. We had a few on Ritalin for ADHD at the time. We had lots of ear infections, which are vaccine reactions, but we didn't have any of this. We didn't have any SIDS. I mean, SIDS was common then, and SIDS happens with vaccines. But to say it's better diagnosis, which is out there everywhere, is ludicrous.
Definitely, and there are a couple things I wanted to highlight. The CDC really has not looked at even the smallest fraction of vaccines and vaccine components as related to neurological issues, neurological injury in children. The only things that they really looked at were based on public outcry were thimerosal and the MMR vaccine. And there are, the CDC has done, since 2000, has done 12 different population-based studies. These resulted in 12 peer-reviewed publications.
It strikes me right now, and I might as well just stop it and say it, that the idea that Wakefield published a paper about autism and vaccines causing it is not any different than them publishing a paper about the proximal origins of the virus. And the whole principle of the paper gets you to accept the virus. The whole principle of the paper gets you to accept autism. Autism is something that happens to kids. It is when this and that happens. And there could be a cause, and it might be vaccines. And Andrew Wakefield got it right or got it wrong. Does impeccable science is a complete fraud? It doesn't matter. The existence of Andrew Wakefield and the question of autism and MMR and his whole role is identical to the proximal origins of SARS-CoV-2. It's a Scooby-Doo. And the bad guy's autism. But what if autism doesn't exist, like 2013 Brian Hooker claims it doesn't exist? It's just neurological damage due to intramuscular injection of a combination of bullshit, calling it medicine. And what if the whole point of Andrew Wakefield is to just establish the idea that autism is real and it's a brain and a gut thing? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, that's it. It is really it. I'm sorry, but I really think Andrew Wakefield is the same. And look, if Andrew Wakefield and Peter Daszak are on the same paper in 1990 whatever, how can you not see it anymore as what this is? That Andrew Wakefield was put in place to create a narrative that got you to accept the pretenses of that limited spectrum of debate. And now we need to do the scholarly work necessary to figure out exactly what those pretenses were and what we were led to accept as we participated in that lively debate. Just like the proximal origins of SARS-CoV-2 got us to participate in a very lively debate that convinced us that, wow, gain of function might be a reasonable explanation. Maybe they are covering it up. Maybe autism is caused by vaccines, accepts the existence of autism as a phenomenon that might, for example, have environmental and genetic causes. When in reality, maybe 2013 Brian Hooker was right all along. It's not autism. I don't like that word. I don't call it that word. My son is vaccine damaged. It's a neurological insult that he suffered when he got 5 vaccines in one go. Interesting interpretation of our recent history available on the internet that no one else is talking about besides me and Mark.
And many of them were such poor quality that they were originally rejected by frontline journals like the Journal of American Medical Association or the New England Journal of Medicine. And based on my FOIA efforts, I've been able to show that all 12 are at a minimum flawed, but are many of them, I haven't proven that all of them are fraudulent, but the large majority I can show they're actually fraudulent studies. In 2010, the CDC came out with what was supposed to be the end-all study on thimerosal and autism. It was done, actually, the first author was not from the CDC. It was from a research firm that CDC hired. His name was Christopher Price. He was not a PhD scientist. I believe he has his master's in statistics. And then the second author was a guy named Frank DiStefano, who was the head of the vaccine safety office in the CDC. And in this,
another thing to notice with 2013 Brian Hooker is that he names names. He's fine with naming names. He's not building a big top tent of health freedom here. He's telling you who told the lies and when. I like that.
particular study, the statistical phenomenon and statistical errors within that particular study meant that the lion's share of what they presented was fatally flawed. There was a statistical error called overmatching, where the cases that they were looking at and the controls got virtually the same thimerosal concentration, and so you could prove nothing. But the one part of the study that was valid was prenatal thimerosal exposure. Now, this is very important because this is the mode of exposure, the primary mode of exposure that infants and children are receiving thimerosal is because the flu shot in the United States contains thimerosal. Over 50%, probably more like 70% of the flu shots that are given specifically to pregnant women contain thimerosal. And the Price study, basically within the text of the study, said that there was no effect, there was no reason to forego a thimerosal-containing flu shot because it was not connected to autism, period. But even the results that they presented showed that there was an 86% increased risk in autism in those infants that were exposed to this mercury prenatally. Now, when I looked at the background report and when I received the information via FOIA, I saw something completely different. In essence, the real risk that was associated with the flu vaccine containing thimerosal was 800%, meaning that a child that received or was exposed to thimerosal through a flu vaccine that the mom got while she was pregnant, the child was up to 8 times more likely to receive an autism diagnosis than a child that...
Now remember, MMR is what Wakefield talked about. MMR is what was featured kind of in Vaxxed. Hepatitis, or HPV shot is what's featured in Vax 2. Neither movie is really saying that intramuscular injection is dumb and that it can be any of these things. And Brian isn't really there yet, as he tries to say that it's the thimerosal. It's the thimerosal because that's the mercury part. It couldn't also be the recombinant proteins that they put in there. It couldn't also be the preservatives that are in there that aren't tested, like all of the things that Brandy Vaughn listed on her billboards. Brandy Vaughn just didn't list aluminum and mercury. She never even listed thimerosal because that wasn't really, that's not in very many shots. And if you take that out, then is the shot okay? Man, oh man, I'm frustrated here. I still don't think 2013 Brian Hooker is a bad guy. I think 2013 Brian Hooker is trying to tell the truth. And what you hear later on is the truncated, titrated, obfuscated version of the truth where you can say that certain parts are dangerous or certain components are dangerous or the adjuvants are dangerous. And you know, Bobby Kennedy's going to get to the adjuvants eventually. You can see that iPhone video of Mark if you need some comedy.
Was not exposed to thimerosal. CDC covered this up. There's no statistical basis for what they did. They just didn't like the data, so they didn't report it. And that is fraud. I mean, it's pure and simple fraud.
Yes, indeed is, and it's an outrage.
Yes, and there are, you know, I could go on for days and days and days. Unfortunately, it's very horrifying to get this information via the FOIA. I now have folks in Congress that are helping me get this information. I'm getting lots of information through them. I get it leaked through sources that will call me up and say, I can't release my name, but I want you to have this information. You know, there are even insiders in the CDC. We hope that somebody will come forward as a whistleblower at some point. You know, there are insiders that want this information out. Same thing with an MMR. You know, the CDC did an MMR study in 2010 2004. And if you read the study, it shows that in some cases, boys that got the MMR on time versus boys that got the MMR after 3 years were 250 more likely to receive a diagnosis of autism than those where the parents delayed. And the CDC didn't even look at the portion.
And so what I find,
they absolutely refused to.
What I find important about this is that in 2013, Brian already knows that if he would just be able to delay the schedule, he could save a lot of kids from this severe injury. And so in a lot of ways, you can see where somebody like Paul Thomas has an argument that, it's better to delay how long it is the first time your kid gets hit in the head with a baseball bat. And if you can delay that until 3 years old, that would be really good for your kid's overall future. That makes sense. Totally makes sense to me. The point is, though, if you know that hitting a kid with a baseball bat is always bad, then why don't you just say that? In fact, as a sophisticated biologist, you should be able to use the evidence that the later you hit a kid with a baseball bat, the less damage it can potentially do for the remainder of his life, to make the argument that hitting a kid with a baseball bat is bad at any age. Because that's what you would expect to anything that could throw off the pattern integrity and the development of that pattern integrity across time. It would have to be a pretty malevolent insult. In fact, I would argue that a baseball bat has less likelihood of changing that trajectory across time than an intramuscular injection does. Think about them apples for a second.
Do that study. Okay.
Yeah, but that's across the board. They consistently, in essence, it's a hear no unvaccinated information, see no unvaccinated information, speak no unvaccinated information.
Right.
Yeah, it's so ridiculously obvious.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
And yet, it's no unvaccinated information, see no unvaccinated information, speak no unvaccinated information.
There's the point that Polly made in 2019, probably because of the influence of Brandy Vaughn, that actually the real message is that unvaccinated kids are fine. In fact, they're higher functioning than most fully vaccinated children. They have far less health problems. And that message doesn't mean that we should delay the vaccine schedule or that we should advocate for free choice. It means that if you want to protect the grandkids of America, you should advocate for the ending of the U.S. vaccine schedule. And I think that they should have been there already in 2013 if they could have been on the radio talking this much shit. Then by 2015, when they met Brandy Vaughn, they should have been giving high fives and saying, damn right, baby, let's get this on every billboard in every state in America and let's end the vaccine schedule by 2016. Because that would have been 4 years of collaboration on this problem. And that's not what happened, guys. That's not what happened at all.
Right.
Yeah, it's so ridiculously obvious.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
And yet, I mean, it's surreal. The American public those are interested and watching, for instance, the recent congressional hearings, about which I'd like to speak in a little while. Can sit there and, like some of the folks in the gallery behind the two CDC doctors, sit there and shake their head at the answers being given out. But when the American...
I'm going to pause this here. I'm going to show you that actually I do have loaded up the other video, the Union of the Unwanted, which was in December of 2020, just after Brandy Vaughn died. There is a stream where Brian Hooker holds court. And Mark already did a nice stream about this and pushed some of the highlights that I think are very stunning. But I do think that this video is probably worth a full study hall. And so tomorrow I'm going to do that. I might finish that video behind this one up first and then start with this one.
No.
I assure you we have a lot of work to do. Team Worst Case Scenario doesn't seem to be going away. And that's because I think they still have a control over the
Americans,
social
we're only
media
4%.
messaging. That's why they're still inserting new players. That's why they're still using people in the UK to help insert these new players. It's an illusion of consensus that spans the globe. It's a little weird populist movement, and nobody is in this narrative by chance, except for me and Mark. We're not in the narrative, though, right? We have a timeline where everybody meets us and ignores us, obfuscates our work, or never even mentions it. And even after I'm in the book, it doesn't matter. They still write virology reviews without me. And it's all the same people, ladies and gentlemen, promoting each other in a fake theater. It's a fake resistance. These are all traitors to our grandkids. I have no doubt about it in my mind. And the ones that are unwitting need to feel the pressure so that they realize how they've been fooled, how they've been used. Brett Weinstein doesn't need to be pressured. He knows exactly how he's been used, and he's happy to be used that way. He hopes that at some point the elite will thank him and his family's contribution to our enslavement. I think that you can find out who any of these people are that are currently in front of us, rising stars of the new social media, by simply looking at what they were clowning with in 2020. And everybody from, Julian Michaels to Chris Martenson can be seen plainly for who they were and what they were doing when they did it. It's not happy little accidents, ladies and gentlemen. It's malevolence. It's not happy little accidents that these people are being paid by these nonprofits. It is not happy little accidents. It is malevolence and traitors. It's not an accident that this guy has been following me around for 5 years, the former research and development director of the Human Genome Project. This is real. The lies that they tell are real evidence of the malevolence. They are real evidence of what's going on and how bad it is off script. I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was supposed to be more than Health and Human Services Secretary. I think they hoped that they would get other people in positions of power, although I'm still convinced that Marty McCarty and Jay Bhattacharya are already vetted and going to be playing along, because they already must know that the vaccine schedule in America is criminal, and they must know that we must be governed in order for this to be sustained. They have to run out the clock, ladies and gentlemen. The vaccine schedule will eventually be admitted to be faulty, not perfect. And the COVID vaccine will also be admitted to be not perfect. But the next generation of this molecular medicine will be personalized, and they will use the murder and lies listed here to make that transformation possible. These people use that list of murder and lies to make the transformation possible by enacting a dinner theater about a mystery virus. That's why none of these organizations will ever explain to you the significance of Brandy Vaughan's simple idea of comparing ingestion to injection of a pharmaceutical. They will never enunciate the Gigaohm Biological language of that nature. Intramuscular injection is dumb, and challenge their doctor members to correct that. That's because they all know we're right. They all know the truth. They never imagined that we would be able to so succinctly describe it. They never imagined that we would rediscover Brandy Vaughan, and they never imagined that somebody with my track record and history in biology would ever come to the conclusion that there is no safe vaccine, that intramuscular injection of medicine is a lie, and risk his family's well-being to try and spread this message, just like Brandy did. Putting it all on the line to spread this one message and risk it all. Because if this is the truth, and I'll say if this is the truth, then what else is there to argue about? What else is there to fight for? You're going to argue for seatbelts? You're going to fight for getting the bad dyes out of Fruit Loops? If you're going to fight for something, maybe you should fight for getting Narcan in every single ambulance in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what to say other than you can find out if these people are meddlers, just like I'm finding out by looking at their track record that's still freely available on the internet. You can find out what these people weren't doing when they should have done it. And you can tell your grandkids the truth. You can make sure that they get it. One of the ways to make sure that they get it is to make sure that a story about these people is published. And Gigaohm Biological is working on that right now. It's going to be one of the books that we put out. I don't have a book contract. I don't have a book written. I've got lots of notes and lots of outlines about what these people have done, and I'm trying to integrate it into a story that makes sense so that I can pass down something to my kids that they can hand out and help to spread the word of how the United States was essentially ruined by a bunch of traitors. When the truth was available, they chose to ignore it for the slavers. I'm not really sure how to describe what happened if Brian Hooker was there in 2013 and we're now in 2025 and he still can't say that intramuscular injection is dumb, except to say that this must be a national security exercise. That the vaccine schedule in America and its future use as a central part of the pivot to personalized medicine and the collection of all the medical and genetic data of American citizens, that this is a national security exercise that these people were recruited into. I don't know when Brian Hooker was recruited in, but my guess is if you check his language over time, you will see an abrupt change when he was recruited. Maybe it was 2018 when the World Mercury Project changed its name to Children's Health Defense. Maybe it was before that. I don't know. But I know that right now, Brian Hooker's not working for us because there's no way to explain how a guy with all that molecular experience, relevant biotechnological experience with recombinant genetics that includes transformation and transfection, in 2013 could be where we just heard him, and then in 2025 be unable to say anything other than rise and resist, people over profits, truth over lies, and courage over fear. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but there's only one conclusion to come to. Brian Hooker is a fraud. Brian Hooker is a traitor to our grandchildren, and at some point he sold out like Mary Holland did. Otherwise, that video wouldn't exist. And the videos with him and Mary Holland and Kevin McKernan at the end of 24 wouldn't exist, or 23 wouldn't exist, and be part of the portfolio of reasons why I was fired from CHD. Ladies and gentlemen, PCR as a diagnostic is a fraud. The only thing they have is synthetic recombinant genetics that they've used to make protein biologics for decades. They can make a large quantity of pure DNA and they could put it places. They could even call that virology if they wanted to, but it wouldn't make it real. But I assure you that with an agent in Wuhan and a little collaboration, they could find anything they wanted to find in high fidelity and even trick other people into thinking that they found it. Transfection is a crime, ladies and gentlemen, and the way that they got away with it is placebo. It may be the way that they're getting away with the vaccine schedule in America as it stands, that many of them are placebo. Maybe they even told that to Brian when they finally read him in on the national security operation that he seems to be a part of. I don't know what to say, ladies and gentlemen, but endemicity is a myth, and a foundational myth of RNA virology that can be dispelled with 3 words. RNA cannot pandemic. That's bullshit. There is a hot background upon which non-specific PCR tests could be applied, and that's the end of the mythology. RNA cannot pandemic. Intramuscular injection is dumb. Transfecting healthy humans was always a crime, and the population pyramids is a problem needing managing. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow. We got lots of work to do, ladies and gentlemen. Tomorrow's going to be a big stream because I have a feeling there's going to be an incredible amount of bullshit in that 2020 video with Brian Hooker on the ripple effect. I'm going to get this butter out of my jacket. See ya.
It is much more likely it's a lab leak.